Happy New Year, everyone. This is our first message for the new year. Welcome to the channel, and it is a doozy. Yield to your nature. Oof. Once upon a time, I saw the Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith speaking with Oprah Winfrey, and he said the following as he was describing our spiritual journey. He said, pain pushes until the vision pulls. Pain pushes until the vision pulls. And I think what he was talking about was that many of us come to the spiritual journey, the spiritual path, because of discontent, because of pain, because of trauma, because of sadness, anxiety, stress. We come to the spiritual journey because some form of pain is pushing us to find an alternative to the life that we are living. And then as we engage in the spiritual journey and some of that pain is healed and transformed, eventually what surges within us is a vision. And that vision is so spectacular that it actually draws us forward. It pulls us forward. The vision pulls, as he said. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about our irresistible attraction to God. The irresistible attraction to God. And I'm using that word very specifically because irresistible, it means that it cannot be resisted. Okay, you cannot fight against it. Remember the Star Trek episode, resistance is futile. You shall be assimilated. It's a basic idea here today. So we have to start by asking ourselves, how do you see God in your life? How do you see God? Now, the theologian and scholar, Bible scholar, Marcus Borg said that the way we see God, the way we determine what God is to us, really has a lot to do on our world stance, the way we show up in the world, the way we behave in the world. And he identified three different ways in which people sometimes see God. And the first one, of course, is vengeful, right? A vengeful God, a wrathful God, a fear-producing God. We see evidence of that in our world. The next, he said, was sort of neutral, that God is there, but God doesn't really care too much for us. It's kind of an impersonal God. It's not something that there's not a lot of care or compassion for us. God is there, but there's not too much care for us. Sort of a neutral stance. And then the third is a friendly, loving, and caring God, right? And if you are listening to this, you might just ask yourself, in what category do you put God? And we can see evidence of this in our world. Obviously, in the Old Testament, right? Moses comes to the burning bush and God speaks to him, but it says in the Bible that Moses didn't want to show his face. He didn't want to show his face to God, didn't want to see the face of God because he was fearful, right? And of course, many people have this idea of a vengeful, wrathful God, something to be feared. Many of us in our modern spiritual culture have this neutral stance toward God, where God is more like a law, presence, a principle, but doesn't really interact with us at a heart level, at a visceral level, emotional, physical level. And then some of us have this idea of a God that is actually love within us, that is compassion and care, and right, we can have that stance in our world. We see all three expressed. Now, Jesus in John 6:39 through 37 said the following, which is kind of like a mission statement for Jesus. He says, "Everything that the Father gives me will come to me, and anyone who comes to me I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me. That I shall lose nothing of all that he has given me." And I think Jesus was speaking from the Christ consciousness here, in which he's talking about that understanding that the will of God implies a sense of love, of care, of consideration, of compassion for us. This is a vision of a God that is very close to us in all respects. Juan Enrique Toro greeting you on this beautiful day, thanking you for the thumbs up, for the subscriptions. That helps our channel grow. And thank you also for those wonderful donations. The links for the donations are below. And so if we're going to talk about something that is irresistible, we're talking about God being an irresistible attraction in our life. But when we get down to it, many of us would say that we find things of the world more irresistible than God. Right? We kind of set God aside, our spiritual nature, all that's good and fine. But what we really find attraction is things of the world. You know, like our cell phones, or the refrigerator, or the bedroom, or money, right? All of these are much more attractive to us oftentimes than God. And if we happen to fall into some sort of addictive camp, addiction, obviously alcohol, drugs, codependent relationships, we have a need, a desire for that a lot more than we do for God. Now, what I want to say is that all of these worldly desires, at their foundation, at their very root, are really a covered up desire for God. That these are reflections, that these are pointers towards a deeper relationship with God. God's attraction to us is irresistible, and these other worldly attractions are but shadows, pointers to that deeper attraction. So we need to ask ourselves, why is it that we would repress God in our life? Why is it that we set God aside, that we put more interest, it seems, in the things of the world than of God? Well, I would point out that there is probably an existential fear within all of us. Okay, we fear that if we really surrender to God, if we really turn our life over to God, that part of us is going to cease to exist. And one of the metaphors that I like about the spiritual journey is that the way to explain who we are is that we're like a drop in the ocean, right? Not like a raisin in a bun. Kind of a famous description. We're more like a drop in the ocean rather than a raisin in a bun. What that means is that the drop in the ocean has the essential essence of the entire ocean, whereas the raisin in the bun has a little point of spirituality of God within the mass that is the muffin, right? And so we're talking about oneness here. We're more of the drop of the ocean. But of course, what happens to that drop, right? If we drop that drop into the ocean, it becomes the ocean. There's no differentiation. There's no I. I become one with the ocean. And I think that we probably have an existential fear of becoming that allness, which could be described as nothingness. We could cease to exist in some way. And so we have this dynamic, right, which is the pull of the world with all its baubles and with all its attractions and with all of that desires that we have within us. And of course we have on the other side this pull of God, which I'm calling irresistible today. And we see that there is this dynamic between things of the ego, which we could call the world, and the spiritual. Now, the ego is important. You know, the ego is the one that sets up the society, the rules of the game, the laws in which we play. And then there's this fear that if we jump into the spiritual, that will be disrupted somehow, that won't be honored. And we see this, obviously, in the life of Jesus, right? Jesus is a huge rebel. He comes in talking about radical ideas, so radical that that world in those days decided to crucify him. And this is not a new idea, right? We're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we understand that he had a vision, a huge vision for oneness, for love, for equality. And the world couldn't tolerate that message either. And we know that he was assassinated. So we have this dynamic of, if we really give in to the vision that Spirit would offer us, that the world won't be able to accept it, right? And there's also another fear that may have come as a result of our spirituality that says, well, if I, really pray to God, maybe God won't do anything. And many of us have had this experience of wholeheartedly praying to God and not seeing any effects, not seeing how our life may have been improved or bettered, healed because of that. That we have this fear that God won't show up. All of these are fears that sort of cover up the essential pull of that vision, of that attraction for God. There is something else which is very interesting, and this is a psychological term that Freud coined. He called it reaction formation. And what this is when we have emotional impulses which produce anxiety or are unacceptable to us, we exaggerate in the opposite. Okay? Reaction formation. We react to something that we just seem as unacceptable. And the classic example of this is maybe there's a man who feels that he might have homosexual tendencies, but he's very fearful of those tendencies. And so what he does is he generates an exaggerated reaction to the contrary. He becomes a man's man, he speaks out against gay and homosexuality, but all of that is really to cover up some deep-centered desire or homosexual tendencies, okay? Now, if you have heard people say, or maybe you've said for yourself, I wish I had more faith, right? I wish I felt God more in my life, right? That can be a reaction formation. In other words, we're so fearful of this existential fear I was talking about, of giving our way into God, that we go exaggerate to the opposite. Well, God is just not in my life. We say we might even go as far as saying there is no God, right? So this reaction formation may be something that we need to consider for our own life. We could even go so far as to say that this whole world is founded on the idea of covering God, right? Of repressing God. And of course, if something is repressed in us, we can't feel it at all. But here's the thing. God's presence, God's expression, will find its way, maybe through tiny little pieces, to become known in our life. There are moments of light. There are moments of peace. There are moments of realization. Those are bits and pieces of God that kind of break through. And these are like tiny echoes, right? Tiny echoes of a song that is pulling us toward a vision of oneness with God. And those little tiny pieces of God are really a huge thing. Are really huge. We need to recognize that. And here's the essential truth, right? God will win in the end. If there is a battle or a dynamic between the ego and the soul, or the ego and spirit, as you want to call it, well, in the end, God is going to win. God consciousness is huge. Ego is tiny, is small. And in the end, God will be the full expression of who we are. Like I said, it is irresistible. God is irresistible. So we have to ask ourselves, why do we keep trying to repress God, to deviate, detour away from God? In the end, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are one with God. And so, why not accept that for ourselves? Yield to our true nature. If we look at the Alcoholics Anonymous community, all the recovery community, we see that it is based on this idea. You know, the way I understand addiction is that if we feel addicted to something, right, it is a relationship. It becomes our number one relationship. The alcoholic has its number one relationship with the bottle. And what Alcoholics Anonymous does is it takes that relationship and shifts it from the bottle to the higher power, or what we're calling God today. So it's a shift in emphasis. It puts all of the healing properties into a change of relationship to one with God, to make God feel like it's really a living presence within us. Not only does it heal the addiction, but it also heals the life. Again, because the attraction to God is irresistible. So, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we give in or surrender or choose or even yield to God? This is our important question for us today. Because, you know, all of us who are probably watching this channel have some sort of practice or discipline. We may read a daily devotional, we may read the Bible or other inspirational books, we may practice meditation or prayer, we have other practices that help us stay conscious, we practice forgiveness, we meditate, and so all of that. And many times when we come to these disciplines, we're making a conscious choice. You know, you say, okay, I'm going to sit down and do my meditation for today. So I'd like to present this idea to you. Rather than choosing to do your spiritual work, because like I say, it requires discipline, and you know, we feel that if we do this, well, we're a good spiritual student. Rather than choose, let's just yield. This is the key word for us today, yield. What I mean by that is that there is this irresistible attraction to God that if we rather surrender to, yield to, is going to come to the forefront. Rather than disciplining ourselves to do the spiritual work, we can simply say to ourselves, wow, God is what I really want. And I'm going to do this reading. I'm going to do this practice. I'm going to do this meditation or this prayer. Not because I'm a good spiritual student, but because it's what underneath it all, that's what I really want. The best thing in my life is to feel that connection with God. I'm going to yield to my nature, you see. That's what we're saying. Underneath it all, what we're all desiring, wanting, praying for is to feel God's love expressed in and through us magnificently. And so if that is true, we can yield to the presence of God anytime we're going to do any of our reading, our practice, or when we're going to go to church. We can say things like that. I can't wait. I can't wait to get into that space, right? That prayerful space, that meditative space, that heart space that we call God. And here's another way that we can practice this. When we feel the call of the refrigerator, or the bedroom, or the bottle, whatever it may be, let's just take a moment and say, you know what? That call is really a call towards a connection with God. I may go to the refrigerator, but underneath it all, I'm going to say this satisfaction is really the satisfaction of being one with God. This is the way we're going to yield to our nature in this new year. So that's my invitation to you, to recognize that God is going to win in the end. God is an irresistible attraction within us. Meditate on that. Feel that. Any small glimpse or piece of God coming through is a huge opening for all of us. And all of these other desires, these worldly desires, are but a shadow, a reflection, a pointer towards a deeper connection with God. Yield to your nature. Juan Enrique Toro, blessing you on this wonderful day, thanking you for the thumbs up, for the subscription, and for the wonderful donations. The link is below. Reminding you in this new year that life is consciousness, and consciousness is life.